welcome back to the RWA British Keelweight Sailing online match racing sessions. Tonight we're going to be talking about the pre-start, a really important part of the match race, and also important in the sense that it's so different from other types of racing. So therefore this is probably one of the more unique areas of match racing. Tonight we'll be looking at a recap of the introduction, so a lot of the content you may have seen before, however we're going to go into a little bit more depth into it. What information can you get before the start? What the entry options are and the first meet? What happens in the middle phase of the start? And the types of start and options. The next slide is something we have already covered, but I think it's important to highlight it again, especially if you haven't seen the introduction session. Why is match racing start so different to fleet racing? Well, here we have a little diagram, and as you can see, we have a boat at each end. So just remember there's two boats in the race. At the pin end, you have the blue boat, who will be showing that they're the blue boat either with a flag or they might have a sheet on their sail, it might be velcroed on. There's a variety of options. Then you have the yellow boat at the starboard end. At 4 minutes we have the entry. So this is where the boats effectively start their race, and they will be fighting to get that best position and the winning start at go time. So a diagram that we've all seen before, but we're going to enter it both ends, and it is really important that we are outside the H, if you like, before 4 minutes. If you cross this line, you will receive a penalty. So here we go. We'll watch the boats enter. They have to cross down beneath the start line. Then they come up together, and then they go into what we call a dial-up. There's a lot of positions in the dial-up that can make your life easier and harder. But as a general rule of thumb, as the yellow boat, you want to try and get back a little bit on the blue boat. And as the blue boat, you're trying to get as close as possible to the yellow boat without getting a penalty. So moving on to the start sequence. We discussed this in our introductory session, but I just want to go through it again so it's really ingrained in your mind and there's no confusion when you get to your first match racing event. So at 7 minutes, you see the F flag, which is this flag shown on the screen. It's a white background with a red diamond, and this will go at 7 minutes. However, if you're in the second match or the third match, then it will be your 12 or 17 minutes, depending on the time. 6 minutes, the F flag comes down. 5 minutes, your numeral pennant goes up. So as we discussed before, numeral pennant 1 will go up for the first match. This is the one shown on the screen. 2 is blue with a white dot, and 3 is the tricolour. 4 minutes, same as a fleet race, you will see the P flag. At 2 minutes, you will see a penalty flag if you've not entered properly. So if you haven't ducked down beneath the start line at entry, a flag will go up on the committee boat, and then this will be transferred to the umpire's boats. And do note that you can't take this penalty before the start time. 1 minute, same as fleet racing, the P flag will come down. And at go, your numeral pennant will come down, and if you're in the next match, that's when your numeral pennant will go up. So for example, in this case, numeral pennant 1 comes down, and then 2 will go up. So then that's 1 minute to the next start's entry. So there's no gaps. There's lots of beeps going on, and it could be quite confusing. It is important to check what the situation is with flags, timing. A lot of match racing events are trying to make it more spectator friendly. So rather than having the numeral pennant flags that sailors know, they may just use a simple flag with a number 5 on it for three, maybe even 3, 2 and 1. So just to keep an eye out of what might be happening for your specific event. So what information is useful to get before the start? So we always have a little routine. It's really important to try and do this each time you get in the boat. If you're the second or third match, you may actually find that you have a bit more time, and there might be times where the boats that are racing are a bit further away from the start line and you can sneak in. However, it's really important that you don't affect any of the racing that's going on whilst you're getting these check-ins. We always try to get a head to wind in the middle of the line, and this is to see whether the beat is square. What you might find is you go head to wind, and if you're pointing at the windward mark, the beat is probably going to be square. However, if it's a bit further to your right, you're going to spend more time on port, and if it's a bit further to the left, you'll spend more time on starboard. The reason why there's quite an emphasis on this in match racing is if you get into a tacking duel or you come together, it's really easy to lose track of where you are. So having the idea in your head and reminding the rest of the crew which is the long tack may help decide which tack you might choose to extend on or to try and bounce the other boat to. Practice the time and distance. So you may remember from last time we saw the speech bubbles. This is to try and highlight who is speaking when. So my example was in a 3-person boat. As the bow person, I will do the time and distance. And that is repeated every time the time to go, so the real time, the countdown time, every time that is said, I would follow it up with the time to burn. And we practice this whilst we're doing the ley lines. So you won't necessarily get the ley line straight away. And each time you do, try and count down the time that you think it's going to take you to sail to the line. This then gives you a bit of a gauge and a reference each time you are doing it for real. Slow boat handling manoeuvres. So this might be practice an acceleration or timing a spin, which is actually the next point. But how long is each manoeuvre that you might encounter or that you might end up doing in the pre-start? How long are those manoeuvres going to be? All of it has to be so specific with the timing so you don't lose track. Remember, we still want to be on the start line at go time. So here I've just drawn us a little diagram. Now what we would do, the order that we do it in, is we would get the starboard ley line whilst trying to get the time and distance. So if you see the light blue arrow on the right hand side of the screen, that's your starboard boat, your starboard ley line for the committee boat. We then will take a little dip down and then go to the purple arrow on the left hand side of the screen, which is the ley line for the boat and the pin. And as you will remember, the diagram that has the colours of the no-go zones in your pre-start area, to the left of that purple arrow is a big no-go zone. And if you end up there, it's likely you're going to get pretty stuck. We then tack over and time the line. So you're probably thinking, that's a weird thing to time. Why would you do that? The reason for that is if you are early, or if it's a pin end start or pin end bias, you know how long it's going to take you to get from one end of the line to the other. And it gives you a reference of whether you've got any space to burn any time if you are early. So we're now going to break down the pre-start into different areas. So as we know, we've got a blue boat and a yellow boat. The pin end is at the bottom of the screen and the starboard end at the top of the screen. So we've got I and L coming together. What you'll see on the video is they are entering at 4 minutes. So they're crossing this line perpendicular to the start line. So they're going to enter, and here at this point, the pin end boat, which is the boat at the bottom of the screen, can actually start heading up. They have now entered. As soon as they head up, the stern will be in. At this point, it's quite important that somebody on the boat, doesn't matter who, can call that you have entered. This then makes everyone aware that they can continue up and hopefully get free of the starboard boat. So they've entered, and now they're going to come up together. And what's quite nice is L gets across towards the starboard end, but if they had just headed up a little bit sooner, they would be even further to the starboard end. What you can see here is we've got I has done a really good job of slowing. So the starboard boat slows as they come up and to meet the port boat. Remember that the port boat has tacked, so they're naturally going to be slower. And the further back L can be on I, the better and more in control that they're going to be. As it turns out, in this situation, I is in a good position. They've got good gauge, which means distance between the two boats, to them be in control. So if L bears away at this point, I can bear away with them and stop them from jibing, and L also doesn't have a tack. So really, really strong position for I here. What is really important at this point is both boats are head to wind, and the boats tend to go sideways quite quickly. So how we stop this and keep them head to wind is by the helm trying to keep the tiller quite neutral and trying to keep it head to wind when needed. But you will gradually slow down, which means the pressure on the tiller will feel really light. Therefore, you need the bow or the trimmer keeping the bow head to wind using the jib. So how we do that is we just back it from side to side. What you'll find in bigger boats is you'll have the bow person on the bow itself looking back at the helmsman. If it's a jib or a big genoa, you'll end up getting the sail in your hands like this, in the middle of the foot of the sail, and then pushing it from side to side. Often at this point, the helm is actually calling which side they want it, depending which flow they have on the rudder. And when we say flow, either forward or backwards, but also it might depend where they want the position of the bow to be. You may want to back the jib quite big one side to help you fully turn out. So the jib is really, really powerful, and it's really important that you find that position as the trimmer or the bow to make sure that you can be in a good position to help the helm when they need it. So what happens on the entry with the pin bias line? As you can see from this diagram, both boats have entered. They have crossed behind the start line. They've entered at 4 minutes, and as you can see, the blue boat, which is the pin boat, clearly has a cross on the starboard boat. What starboard needs to do here is to decide whether they're going to enter and tack away straight away, ready to come back at the blue boat on starboard, or whether they're going to tack just on the blue boat's hip, ready to then be in control and not let the blue boat get back to the start line very easily. Once you have crossed, brilliant, happy days. But if you keep heading in that direction, you're ending up further and further away from the start line on the wrong side of the start line. So once the yellow boat has tacked, as long as you're not going to break any rules, you want to try and press down and start bearing away as soon as possible. If you don't do this, you're at risk of the yellow boat getting an overlap on you, and then they'll carry on taking you upwind, and they will be in control the whole time. So we've discussed what happens on the entry with a pin bias line. What happens in a starboard bias line? The boats enter, they cross beneath the line, but this time blue realises that they can cross slow. Now, if it doesn't look like you're definitely going to cross as the blue boat, then don't. What you need to do is get as far across to this boat end as possible to bring the game over to that right hand side. And If it's touch and go, just bring it into a dial up. We've talked about the dial up, and we have explained what happens with a pin end bias line, a starboard end bias line. This is a slide that keeps coming up, and the reason I keep bringing it up is it's so important to get your head around the bad and good points of the pre-start area. It's really important that we have this in our minds whilst we are interacting with the other boat. And this is where it's really easy to get lost. As we discussed before, it's really easy to go round and round in circles and not really have a clue of how far away from the line you are or where you are in relation to the ley lines. The ley lines being the two lines on the edge of the green square below. So what is the point of the middle phase? We've discussed spinning before, but the middle phase will be where you gain control. So what we mean by that is that the other boat can't tack or jibe. If being controlled, don't be afraid to stop. It's really, really easy to keep sailing far away from the line and then turn your heads around and realise that you're not going to make the start time. So why do we circle? We discussed it a little bit in last session in the debrief for the women's and the youth championships. But I'm just going to touch on it very briefly again. The reason we circle is for positional reasons, but also so that we can get rid of time. So it's all very well knowing how long you've got left, how long it's going to take you to get to the line, but what does that mean in real terms? So how do you know when to turn back? Just because you've got 30 seconds sailing time doesn't mean that you're going to turn back at 30 seconds. This means that you'll probably be late. The reason for that is you're going to have some interaction. The boats are going to be close. It's going to be important to add in that time. Also, you end up sailing not necessarily a direct route to the start line. One good area to keep an eye on is to make sure that you've got a 2-in-1 ratio in your head. So what do I mean by this? This means that if you have 1 minute to go and 30 seconds sailing time, that's roughly a good time to go back. And obviously the time will adjust. So it's important to have that in the back of your mind. However, be aware that in light winds, you will be taking longer to get back to the start line. And if you're interacting with that other boat and it's very close and you're ducking and diving, then it's going to take you longer to get back. So therefore, make sure in lighter winds you give yourself more time, which means that you may have more than 1 minute to get back to the line with 30 seconds sailing. And as it gets windier, it's the opposite. So it obviously takes less time. Therefore, you can risk pushing it towards maybe 50 seconds if you have 30 seconds sailing time. So this is going to change from boat to boat. So if you have that 2-in-1 ratio in the back of your mind, that's a good place to start from and a good reference to work out how the different boats react and whether you might need to adjust it at all. We went into why we circled in the last session. We circle for position reasons, but also to get rid of time. As you can see here, this rectangle boat in front, both boats are on port. This rectangle boat has enough room to go into a jibe. What you don't want to do at this point is slow down into the jibe. You want to keep up your speed. What we will expect is that triangle follows them round. We will then ideally see rectangle go straight into another tack. However, we don't see that. So I'm just going to talk each stage through. So we've got both boats here. We've got rectangle, slowed down slightly there, and Triangle's made a massive gain, which means they're right on their heels. This puts Triangle into control straight away. So it's really important that going into each of the sections of the spin, it's really important that you keep up to speed. There's no reason to be slowing at this point unless you're trying to lure them in to get an overlap for whatever reason. In this situation, Rectangle just slowed down too much, allowing Triangle to then be in control. As you can see here, Triangle kept the speed out of the jibe and got an overlap on Rectangle straight away. What is hard to see in this video is the fact that we don't actually know where the ley line is. So this may be okay for Rectangle if they are beneath the starboard ley line. If they are above the starboard ley line, this is where it gets a bit risky for Rectangle and it may be the start over. So it's really important to keep your speed throughout the starting procedures unless you're trying to stop on purpose because you aren't in control. Just watch it from the beginning again. So at this point you can see the front boat starting to slow down. And this means that they're slow out of their jibe as well. A lot more weight should be thrown around in this in these manoeuvres as well. Happy days for Triangle, they're now in control. If Triangle goes with them, at that point they could get their bow down inside and stop them from jibing if they wanted to. Actually, they've let them off, which is fine. But to me, it now looks like they're all just circling for the sake of it and aren't really sure what they are trying to achieve from it. So make sure you've got in your head where the ley lines are and how far away from the start line. So there's a few different options of how you actually start, and each one has its perks and each one has its negatives, and often it depends on the conditions and the boats that you're sailing. As a general rule though, tight to leeward in most boats is pretty strong in light winds. It's very hard for, in this instance, for 3 to hang in there and basically puts 2 in control. So that spins and the position that you're trying to put yourself should include maybe thinking about a tight to leeward position in the lighter airs. Another reason you might use tight to leeward is if the wind is gradually shifting left, or it's oscillating and you're in a left phase at that moment. You then will be able to match the boat's tack, the windward boat's tack, and put yourself in control. We then have a windward start with a gap. Now, this is quite hard to pull off because it involves pushing the other boat down towards the pin end. And what you may find is the leeward boat has chosen to do this, again for a left shift or pin end bias. But the way we're going to be talking about it is that the windward start with a gap is a good position and your winning start. So the reason you might do this is if you're in the right phase, so if the shift or the wind's gone right. It also helps give you a bit more control if you aren't sure. If the pin boat then tacks, you can then hunt them down. Bear in mind, you aren't altering course as you hunt them. As you can see from this video, we have got a nice gap there, and it just gives S a few more options. They can hold in there if they want to. The D currently doesn't have a cross, so it's a really strong position to be in. The second to last one we're going to talk about is the split tack start. So this is more if it is quite even conditions, the pressure is even across the course, not too many shifts. And the reason you might do it is that you've had a lot of interaction before the start. The windward boat may have ended up too close to the leeward boat and needs to tack out. So it may be forced, but also it may be a chosen route. One other reason you might do it is if there's more pressure on either side of the beat, and you've just chosen to do it for a strategy reason. The last final approach we're going to talk about is the obvious win, which is what it says on the tin, really. As you can see in this picture, we have they've obviously followed their routine, talked about their communication, and had led back to the start line and won the start quite easily. Easier said than done. However, if you put all of the routines into practice, stick to your plan, there's no reason that this can't happen more often. Moving on to the summary of tonight's session. Stick to your plan and go for the start that you want. You'll then have more opportunity to gain and start ahead of the other boat. If you start ahead, the chances are, if you sail fast around the course, you will keep your lead and you will win. Be on the same page as your crew. So make sure you have a plan and that the crew are all aware of it. There's no point of the main sheet person and the helmsman talking amongst themselves and not letting the rest of the crew know. Split the roles down. So this relates to the be on the same page as your crew. The crew can help the helmsman with their various roles, whether it's time and distance, ley lines. The communication can't stop. It has to be continuous. If you can, try and make it into a sequence so that you know which information should come next. It also helps as a little prompt if somebody's forgotten to check in with their area. Make sure if you get pinned, don't be afraid to stop. We see boats sailing around, sailing really, really fast away from the start line. Speed is not your friend at that point. Remember, all of the boats are meant to be identical. So the chances of you trying to roll someone that is going the same speed as you is very unlikely. Don't be afraid to stop. Keep your head out of the boat and be aware. So make sure that somebody is checking in with what shift pattern you're on, what wind's coming in, where there's more pressure. There might even be cues from the race in front of you. So keep checking in and don't be afraid to ask each other questions to help prompt those answers. That's the end of the pre-start session. I look forward to seeing you next time where we'll be looking into the upwind sailing. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments boxes underneath and I will get back to you as soon as possible. See you next time.